There is nothing more cruel than the cry of a child in the middle of a snowstorm, when no one is there to answer. Eliza Carter, just 24, recently widowed, clutched her 3-month-old daughter, her stomach empty, her breast run dry. Around her, only the wind howled and despair pressed close. But then, through the shrieking storm, came an unexpected sound. 3 heavy knocks, echoing against the old wooden door. Eliza gripped her late husband's gun, her hands trembling. Was it a person or something else? Stay with us to see what waits behind that door. And if you're watching from afar, share a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. The storm had swallowed the plains long before midnight. Wyoming, winter of 1878. Snow lashed sideways across the empty land, the wind shrieking as if the earth itself had lost its mind. Darkness pressed close, broken only by the faint glow of a lantern inside a lone cabin. Outside, the world had vanished, buried beneath a blizzard that seemed determined to erase every living thing. Inside the cabin, survival hung by a fraying thread. The fire in the hearth coughed on its last scraps of wood, shadows stretching across rough log walls. Smoke leaked unevenly, curling in the air, while the lantern hissed low, its oil nearly gone. The structure trembled as if each gust of wind might tear it apart. On a worn rocking chair by the hearth sat Eliza Carter. She was only 24, yet grief had already carved her face into sharp planes of exhaustion. Her auburn hair, once bright as copper in sunlight, now lay tangled, dulled by cold and neglect. Dark circles shadowed her gray eyes, hollowed from nights without sleep. The black shawl around her shoulders clung more like a shroud than a comfort. In her arms lay Emma, a 3-month-old bundle of trembling life. The child's fists clenched tight, her lips searching, her cries raw and desperate. Eliza cradled her, whispering broken lullabies, her voice rasping with fatigue. But the cries would not stop. Her milk had run dry days ago, her body too starved to give. The last bread was gone, the cupboards empty. And beyond these walls, the land gave nothing but snow and silence. Eliza's gaze flicked toward the empty stall where Samuel's horse should have been. 3 nights earlier, she had tried to ride through the storm to seek help. The animal had collapsed in the drift, its body claimed by the cold before dawn. She had buried it with shaking hands, tears freezing on her cheeks. The loss had left her stranded. No food, no firewood, no way out. Samuel himself was gone as well. Fever had taken him only 2 weeks before. She had stood over his grave with the wind tearing at her veil, too numb even to weep. The man who once filled this cabin with laughter, who chopped wood with a grin and kissed flour from her cheeks as bread baked, now lay beneath frozen earth. She felt his absence everywhere, in the creak of the empty chair, in the silence where his voice should have been. Emma wailed again, a cry that clawed at Eliza's heart. She pressed the baby closer, rocking harder, her whisper cracking. "Hush, little one. Mama's here." But she knew presence was not enough. Hunger gnawed at the infant, and Eliza could not answer it. The thought rose unbidden. Perhaps she should risk it, step out into the storm, walk until she found a neighbor, or died trying. Her stomach churned at the vision of Emma left alone, her tiny face blue in the dark, her body sagged with dizziness. She pressed her lips to Emma's damp forehead and clung to the memory of warmth. Summer afternoons, Samuel splitting wood, outside, calling to her with that boyish smile, the smell of bread, the sound of horses snorting in the yard, all of it gone, swept away in the ruthless tide of winter. A new sound cut through the storm. At first, she thought it a branch tearing loose, hurled against the roof. But then it came again, distinct, deliberate. A dull thud. Her breath caught. She froze, listening. The wind howled, snow hissed, but beneath it, another noise. A faint scuff across the porch boards. Eliza's heart thudded in her ears. Wolves? Number. Wolves did not knock. Then it came. 3 heavy knocks. Hollow, resonant, echoing through the wooden door. Emma whimpered, her cries fading into soft hiccups. Eliza's blood ran cold. No soul could have survived such a night. No neighbor would travel through this storm. Yet someone, or something, stood outside. Her eyes shot to the mantel. Samuel's rifle rested there, long and worn, its wood scarred by years of use. She rose on trembling legs, eased Emma into the quilt-lined cradle by the hearth, and reached for the gun. Her hands shook as she loaded it, the click of metal sharp in the hush. The knocks came again, louder, insistent. Snow swirled in through the cracks around the doorframe, dusting the floor like white ash. The cabin seemed smaller now, the air thicker. Eliza gripped the rifle hard, her palms damp. She crept forward, boots whispering on the wooden floor. Each step felt like a march toward judgment. Her heart pounded so hard she feared the sound would give her away. She reached the door, the iron latch cold beneath her fingertips. For one suspended breath, she hesitated. Her gray eyes darted to Emma, bundled in the cradle, face streaked with tears. A surge of protectiveness steadied her hands. The storm roared on the other side, a beast clawing to be let in. And beneath its howl, that knock had become something more, a summons, a demand she could not ignore. She whispered a prayer, half plea, half warning, and lifted the latch. The rifle rose in her grip, barrel leveled. The latch clicked. Snow whirled through the gap as the door began to open. The world held its breath. Eliza, rifle trembling in her hands, swings the door open into the screaming blizzard, unaware of whether salvation or ruin waits on the threshold. The door swung open into the howling storm. Snow exploded inward, stinging Eliza's face, her rifle trembling in her hands. For one suspended breath, she braced herself for ruin, but through the swirl of white stepped a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in a heavy wool coat dusted with ice. In his gloved hands he carried a leather satchel and a glass bottle steaming faintly with warmth. His voice, steady but low from the cold, broke through the blizzard's roar. "Don't shoot. My name is Daniel Harlo. I come with milk." Eliza blinked, stunned, her heart hammering. She lowered the rifle only a fraction, her breath fogging in the icy air. Behind her, Emma whimpered from the cradle. The man closed the door against the wind and removed his hat. Daniel Harlo was 28, a stranger to her, but known by name in town. A new schoolteacher, they had said. His dark hair clung damp to his temples, eyes the color of deep cedar wood, earnest, steady. Snow dusted his beard, and fatigue lined his young face, but there was a gentleness in his manner, a patience that seemed to steady the very air. Eliza's grip on the rifle tightened again, but Daniel reached into his satchel slowly, deliberately, as if mindful of her fear. He drew out a wrapped bundle of bread, dried meat, and the steaming bottle. "For the baby," he said softly. "And for you." She swallowed hard. Why are you here?" "I heard of your hardship," Daniel answered, voice roughened by the cold. "Mrs. Peterson spoke of it. I couldn't stand by." The name of the elderly woman, the town's midwife, struck Eliza with both relief and suspicion. She glanced at Emma, whose cries were growing thinner, more desperate. The scent of warm milk filled the room, tugging at her resolve. With trembling hands, she reached for the bottle. Daniel stepped closer, his boots wet with melted snow. He removed his gloves and extended his arms. "May I?" Eliza hesitated, rifle still near her side. Her eyes searched his, wary but desperate. His gaze held steady, not demanding, only patient. Slowly she nodded and placed Emma into his arms. The child whimpered weakly, but as the warm milk touched her lips, her tiny mouth latched. Within moments, Emma's cries faded into soft, sucking sounds. Her eyes fluttered closed, her chest rising steady. Eliza's knees nearly buckled with relief. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping unbidden down her cheeks. It was the first sound of peace she had heard in weeks. Daniel held the child carefully, rocking her slightly, his expression softened by awe. "She's strong," he murmured. "She just needed a chance." For the first time, Eliza truly looked at him, not as a stranger at her door, but as a man who had braved the storm for her child. Gratitude warred with suspicion in her chest. Still, her hand rested near the rifle. She whispered hoarsely, "Why risk your life for us? You hardly know me." Daniel looked into the fire, his jaw tight. "Because I couldn't ignore it. Too many suffer in silence on this frontier. I won't be another who looks away." His words lingered in the air, heavy with conviction. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, a fragile calm settled. Emma slept soundly in Daniel's arms. Eliza, exhausted beyond words, leaned against the hearth. For the first time in weeks, her body allowed itself to rest, if only a little. As Daniel laid Emma gently back into the cradle, he admitted, "I heard from Mrs. Peterson that you'd run out of everything, that you might not survive the week. She begged me not to go in this storm, but I couldn't leave it." Eliza stiffened. Part of her wanted to thank Mrs. Peterson for caring, but another part burned with shame. To know her struggle was already spoken of in town. It was as if her grief and desperation had been paraded before others. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly, eyes darting to the floor. "It's not your burden." Daniel shook his head. "No one should bear it alone." Though Emma slept peacefully, Eliza could not shake the weariness pressing on her chest. She kept her hand near the rifle propped against the wall. She wanted to believe, but too many losses had carved suspicion into her bones. Daniel noticed. He did not move closer but kept his distance, his voice gentle. "I'll sit over here, if it eases your mind." He settled onto a rough stool by the wall, palms open, posture unthreatening. His restraint unsettled her more than aggression would have. He asked nothing, demanded nothing, only sat quietly as if waiting. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the hard lines, revealing a tiredness that seemed familiar. Eliza studied him in silence, her grip on fear loosening just slightly. For the first time since Samuel's death, she felt the faintest edge of safety. The hours passed with the storm unrelenting. Outside, the wind screamed and snow battered the walls, but inside, a fragile truce held. Daniel remained by the fire, occasionally glancing at Emma, his expression unguarded in its tenderness. Eliza forced herself to rest on the chair, her body finally yielding to exhaustion. Her head dipped, eyes fluttering shut. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Daniel sitting steady, the child breathing peacefully in the cradle, and the storm pounding unheard against the cabin. When she awoke, the storm was still raging, snow piling against the door. Daniel stood at the window, the satchel at his feet, his shoulders tense. He turned toward her with a quiet finality. "It looks like I'll have to stay the night." The fire popped, the wind shrieked, and the unspoken question filled the room. Was this safety or a new danger? The storm still clawed at the cabin, snow stacking higher against the door. Daniel's words from the night before lingered like smoke. "It looks like I'll have to stay the night." By dawn, the blizzard had softened to a steady hush, like the land itself was exhausted. Gray light seeped through the frost-bitten window panes. Daniel was already awake, crouched by the hearth. Sparks leapt as he coaxed life into the fire. The smell of wood smoke mixed with something richer, a pot of oats simmering, its scent threading through the cold room. Eliza stirred, disoriented. For the first time in weeks, her body had slept deeply. The fatigue that had chained her limbs had loosened, leaving behind something fragile but undeniable: rest. She blinked at the sight of Daniel, steady and intent as he stirred the pot, his profile outlined by firelight. Emma whimpered softly, and Daniel turned, lifting the child with surprising ease. He cradled her against his chest, swaying gently. The baby's cries quieted, her small body curling into the warmth of his coat. Eliza's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the image pierced her like a dream, her child safe in strong arms. The sound of a man humming low under his breath, the smell of breakfast on the fire. It was the picture of a home she thought buried with Samuel. A piece of her ached with longing, another bristled with guilt. Daniel caught her gaze, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "She's fond of company," he said softly. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter. "She's just not used to sleeping so peacefully." They ate in silence at first. The warmth of the oats spread through Eliza's hollowed frame, her stomach remembering what it meant to be filled. Daniel said little, content to watch Emma gurgle in the quilted cradle, the child's laughter faint but alive. After breakfast, Daniel began tidying, moving with the quiet order of a man used to classrooms and children. He stacked the dishes, cleared the hearth, and reached for a battered old Bible resting on the shelf. The leather cover cracked beneath his fingers. As he set it on the table, something slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. A folded paper, yellowed with age. Eliza froze. Her breath hitched as she recognized it immediately. Daniel bent to pick it up, but she snatched it first, her fingers trembling. She unfolded the brittle sheet, her eyes scanning the ink. It was her husband's handwriting. The words sprawled unevenly across the page, urgent, heavy. Samuel had written of a debt he could not repay, a sum owed to a powerful man, and beneath it, threats. Words that chilled her even as the fire crackled. "The land will be mine. Betray me, and you pay with blood." Eliza's throat closed. Her husband had hidden this, tucked it inside the one book she touched daily, as though shielding her from the truth. Her hands shook. She whispered, "He knew. He knew it was coming." Daniel leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "This handwriting, it's Samuel's?" Eliza nodded slowly, tears burning her eyes. "He never told me. He carried this burden alone." Daniel's jaw tightened. He took the letter carefully, scanning the words. "These threats, they're signed. Do you see? The same hand that wrote the demand marked it." Eliza's breath quickened. The signature, though faint, was there. A name she had prayed never to face again. Her fingers brushed the ink, the letters curling with cruel flourish. The name belonged to Calloway, the wealthy rancher who owned half the county. A man whose gaze turned cold as winter whenever it landed on the weak. Eliza's mind reeled. Samuel's fevered death. Was it truly natural? Or had Calloway ensured the debt would never be repaid? Her heart pounded, torn between fear and fury. He threatened us. Even then, Daniel set the letter down gently, his eyes hard. "This isn't just about money. It's about power. Calloway has crushed families for less." Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth, the truth coiling inside her like a knife. Outside, the storm eased into silence, but as the cabin settled, a new unease crept in. Eliza rose, pacing. She clutched Emma close, her eyes darting to the shuttered window. The world felt suddenly porous, exposed. Samuel's secrets had slipped into the light, and with them came danger. Daniel approached slowly. "Eliza, listen. Whatever this is, you're not alone now. We'll face it together." She wanted to believe him, yet the letter in her hands felt like a chain pulling her back into the graveyard of the past. The fire crackled, shadows lengthened across the floor. Daniel returned the Bible to the shelf, his movements steady, careful. But Eliza's heart would not quiet. She could feel something watching, some shift in the air. She stepped toward the window, peering through the frost. And there, just beyond the edge of the trees, a figure stood, a silhouette still as stone. The breath caught in her throat. Whoever it was, they were watching. Through the thin glass, Eliza saw the faint outline of a man. Snow drifted across his shoulders, his hat low, his gaze fixed on the cabin. He did not move, only waited. Her voice broke the silence. "Daniel, someone's out there." The figure outside the cabin stood motionless, snow dusting his shoulders, his hat low, his gaze locked on the window. Eliza's breath had frozen in her throat. "Daniel, someone's out there." But when Daniel strode to the window, the shape was gone, swallowed by trees and drifting white. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the sight itself. For the rest of that night, Eliza could not rid herself of the feeling of unseen eyes. By morning, the storm had broken. The plains, though battered, lay blanketed in glittering snow. Daniel saddled his horse, urging Eliza to bundle Emma tight. "We're going to town," he said firmly. "The doctor must see her." The journey was slow. The trail was half buried, the air still sharp with cold. Daniel rode ahead, leading the way, his coat flapping in the wind. Eliza followed on foot, clutching Emma beneath her shawl. With each step, the wooden buildings of the small settlement of Silverton emerged, rising from the white horizon like weathered sentinels. Silverton was no more than a cluster of buildings, a saloon, a doctor's office, a mercantile, a scattering of cabins. Smoke curled from chimneys. Townsfolk bustled in the thaw, their eyes quick to turn toward the widow who had been absent for weeks. Whispers rustled through the air like dry leaves. Eliza kept her chin low, Emma close. She could feel every stare like a weight pressing on her shoulders. Daniel walked beside her, steady, unbothered, though he noticed too. The doctor's office smelled of liniment and smoke. Dr. Alden Murray, a man in his 50s with a heavy mustache and a stooped back, ushered them in. His hands, though calloused, were steady as he examined Emma, his spectacles glinting in the pale light. He frowned, adjusting the stethoscope against the infant's chest. "She's thin," he murmured, "slightly malnourished, but she's strong. With proper feeding and warmth, she'll recover." Eliza's chest tightened with both relief and guilt. She clutched Emma to her, her voice breaking. I've tried. I couldn't." Dr. Murray's expression softened. "You've kept her alive through worse. Don't blame yourself, but you'll need help." Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. "Then she'll have it." "I'll see to it." Eliza turned sharply, her eyes flashing. Gratitude warred with pride. She wanted to protest, but the sincerity in Daniel's face, the quiet conviction, stopped her words. Outside, the streets of Silverton buzzed with murmurs. Two figures standing by the mercantile leaned close, whispering as Eliza and Daniel passed. "So soon after Carter died," one woman said, lips curling, "and already she's letting another man carry her child." At the well, a group of men spat tobacco, their glances sharp. "Not even buried 6 weeks," one muttered, "and she clings to him like a vine." The sting of the words cut Eliza deep. She walked faster, face pale, Emma tucked tightly in her shawl. Daniel noticed, his jaw tightening, but said nothing. By the time they reached the saloon, her ears rang with the unspoken judgment that hung in every glance. The saloon doors swung with their usual creak. The air inside smelled of whiskey and smoke, laughter colliding with piano keys. Daniel entered first, steady as ever, while Eliza followed reluctantly. Emma clutched close. On the table nearest the door lay a scrap of paper, folded once, as if waiting. Something about its placement caught Eliza's eye. She reached for it, hesitating before unfolding. Her blood turned to ice. Scrawled in rough ink were the words, "Don't dig too deep into the past, widow." Her hands shook as she crushed the paper. She glanced around the room. Men drank, women laughed. The piano hammered out a tune, but she felt every eye on her, as though the entire saloon had conspired. She turned to Daniel, voice taut. "Someone knows." "Someone's watching." Daniel took the paper, his brow darkening. This wasn't random. They wanted you to see it. The saloon seemed to blur, heat rising under Eliza's skin. She steadied Emma, forcing herself to breathe. She felt Daniel's hand brush her elbow, grounding her. "We'll leave," he murmured. "Now." But as they turned, the crowd parted, and there he was, Mr. Calloway. He stood tall, nearing 50, his wealth etched into every detail of his attire. His coat was tailored black wool, lined with fur at the collar. His boots gleamed despite the mud, and a silver pocket watch gleamed against his vest. His hair was iron gray, swept back, his jaw clean-shaven. But it was his eyes that froze Eliza in place, pale blue, sharp as glass, and utterly devoid of warmth. When they landed on her, she felt the weight of the threats hidden in Samuel's letter. He smiled, but it was not kind. The curve of his mouth was slow, deliberate, and cold. "Eliza Carter," he drawled, his voice smooth as oil. "Back among the living, I see." The saloon hushed. Every conversation fell away until only the piano faltered to silence. Daniel shifted slightly, placing himself half a step in front of Eliza, his gaze locked on Calloway. Calloway's eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to Eliza. He took one slow step forward, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. "You've stirred curiosity, widow. Curiosity is a dangerous thing out here." Eliza's throat tightened. She clutched Emma so hard the child stirred, letting out a cry. The sound pierced the tension like a blade. Calloway's smile never faltered, but his eyes glinted with warning, with promise. Eliza lifted her head, forcing herself to meet his stare, and in that instant she understood. The storm outside had only been a prelude. Now the true danger stood before her, cloaked not in snow, but in power. The note crumpled in her palm. Eliza's pulse thundered as Mr. Calloway's cold gaze held. Hers, unyielding, unblinking. Mr. Calloway's cold gaze locked with Eliza's, the saloon silent but for Emma's thin cries. The note crumpled in her hand. For one dreadful heartbeat, time froze. Then Daniel's hand pressed lightly against her arm. "Come," he said low, his voice edged like steel. He guided her out of the saloon, shielding her from Calloway's stare until the heavy doors swung shut. Outside, the winter sun blazed harsh against the snow, but Eliza still felt the ice of those eyes. Days slipped by after that encounter. Daniel stayed close, visiting Eliza's cabin with supplies and tending to the fire when the cold deepened. Emma, once weak and pale, began to stir with new strength. Her cheeks filled out. Her eyes brightened. The sound of her laughter, small, fragile, brought Eliza to tears more than once. Daniel grew gentler, though never overstepping. He carried wood, fixed shutters, read aloud in the evenings from a battered book he had brought from town. Slowly, in moments too brief to name, the cabin began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Still, shadows lingered. The letter Samuel had hidden pressed on Eliza's mind. Its words gnawed at her, urging her to search deeper, though dread wrapped around her like chains. One afternoon, as Eliza fetched water from the well at the edge of Silverton, a woman appeared. She was tall and lean, wrapped in a dark shawl, her face lined with the wear of hard years. Her name was Martha Keene, near 40, once the wife of a ranch hand who had vanished seasons ago. Her eyes, a sharp hazel, fixed on Eliza with unsettling clarity. "You're Samuel Carter's widow," Martha said quietly. Eliza froze, the bucket heavy in her hands. "Yes." The woman stepped closer. "Then you should know. Your husband owed Calloway. My own man did too. He never came back from repaying his debt." Her lips pressed thin. "Some say Calloway's men see to it that debts are never repaid, only collected in blood." Eliza's knees weakened. She clutched the well's rim for balance. Martha's voice softened but carried a sharp edge. "Be careful where you dig, Mrs. Carter." Some truths will bury you whole." Before Eliza could speak, Martha turned and walked swiftly away, her shawl whipping in the wind, vanishing between buildings. Eliza's chest burned. Samuel's fevered death. Was it fever at all? Or something darker, orchestrated? That night, Eliza sat at the rough-hewn table, the hidden letter unfolded before her. The firelight flickered across the ink, Samuel's hand growing frantic in its last lines. Daniel sat across from her, silent, letting her read. His presence was steady, a weight she could lean against. Her eyes stopped at a line she hadn't noticed before, near the bottom. "I have signed, though I know the price if I betray him." Her breath caught. "Signed?" she whispered. "Samuel signed something?" Daniel leaned forward. "A note, a contract. Maybe more." Look at the mark beneath. There, under Samuel's final scrawl, was a sharper hand, smooth, practiced. Eliza stared, heart pounding. The second hand was not her husband's. It was the signature of the man who held the noose around so many throats. "Calloway," Daniel muttered, his jaw clenched. "It's his writing." "I've seen it before." Eliza's hands shook as she traced the ink. "Then Samuel didn't just owe him. Calloway bound him with paper, made sure he could never escape." Her grief twisted into anger, sharp and unrelenting. "He killed my husband, not with a gun, not with fever, but with this." She slammed the letter onto the table. Daniel met her eyes, steady. "Then we make it proof. But we'll need more than just your word and mine." Over the next days, Daniel sought out scraps of evidence. He borrowed ledgers from the mercantile, examined records at the courthouse. He returned each night with papers, receipts, land contracts, all stamped with Calloway's name. Eliza, exhausted yet driven, compared every curl of ink against Samuel's letter. The match was undeniable. Calloway's signature sprawled across deeds, loans, and threats, each as damning as the next. Yet the more proof they gathered, the more eyes followed them through town. Eliza felt it in the hush of voices behind her, in the lingering stares when she passed. One evening, Daniel returned late, snow clinging to his coat, his face grim. He laid 2 sheets side by side on the table, the threatening note and a fresh land deed from Calloway's office. The signatures were identical. Daniel's voice was low but fierce. "This is it, Eliza." His hand, his threat. "Your husband's death wasn't fate, it was design." Eliza's breath trembled. The fire popped, throwing sparks. For the first time, the truth was laid bare, and with it, the certainty that Calloway would not let them live if they spoke it aloud. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. Danger pressed close, nearer than ever. The papers lay side by side, the signatures identical, Calloway's hand unmistakable. Daniel's voice had been low but unyielding. "This is it, Eliza. Your husband's death was no accident. It was design outside." The wind battered the shutters as if echoing the storm about to break within Silverton. Eliza sat rigid at the table, Emma warm in her arms. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on her chest, both freeing and terrifying. For months, grief had told her she was powerless. Now, the ink on those papers gave her a weapon. Her eyes lifted to Daniel. He stood tall, his face drawn but steady, determination burning behind his eyes. "We can't keep this hidden. The town must know." Eliza's voice shook. "He'll come for us." "He already has," Daniel said, glancing at the crumpled warning note on the table. "The difference now is, we're not defenseless." She clutched Emma tighter, inhaling her daughter's soft scent. For the first time, she realized the fight ahead wasn't just for justice. It was for the life of the child in her arms. At sunrise, the church bell rang across Silverton, summoning the townsfolk. The small building, its white paint peeling, filled quickly. Farmers, merchants, ranch hands, and their wives, all murmuring at the sight of Eliza stepping forward with Daniel at her side. She stood in her black shawl, the fabric plain but dignified. Emma nestled against her chest. Daniel carried the documents, his hand firm around them. Sheriff Thomas Gray, a broad man in his early 60s with a heavy brow and a limp from an old wound, leaned on the doorway. His eyes were cautious, but there was something like curiosity flickering there. Eliza's heart pounded as she spoke. My husband Samuel Carter did not die of fever. He was forced into debt by Mr. Calloway. He signed papers under threat. And when he could not pay, her voice faltered, but Daniel steadied her with a glance. He was silenced. Gasps rippled through the pews. Daniel stepped forward, holding up the letter and the deed. These signatures are the same. Calloway threatened Samuel, and he left his mark. The law cannot ignore this. Murmurs rose into a storm of voices. Some townsfolk nodded fiercely, anger flaring. Others hesitated, fear shadowing their faces. Calloway's power stretched deep. His wealth employed half the valley. From the back, a ranch hand muttered, "You're playing with fire." Another shouted, "She's lying, trying to smear a man who built this town." Sheriff Gray raised his hand, silencing the crowd. His gaze fixed on the papers, then on Eliza's trembling but resolute face. If this is true, it will not be buried. The doors banged open. Calloway strode in, flanked by two men in long coats. His presence sucked the air from the room. His smile was cold, his voice velvet smooth. I hear there are accusations. He walked to the front, boots echoing. A widow's grief makes for dangerous stories. But paper? He plucked the documents from Daniel's hand with calculated ease. Paper can be forged. Eliza's knees nearly buckled, but Daniel's hand steadied her. Sheriff Gray stepped forward, his limp heavy but his voice firm. I've seen Calloway's signature 100 times on deeds filed in this office. These papers match. If this is forgery, then half the county is forged. Gasps erupted again, this time sharper, louder. Calloway's mask cracked, his jaw tightening. Calloway's men shifted, hands near their belts. The crowd wavered, fear and anger colliding. For a heartbeat, it seemed violence would shatter the church's walls. Then a voice rang out. Martha Keene stepped from the back, her shawl drawn tight. My husband owed you too, Calloway. He disappeared after meeting your men. You said it was an accident, her voice broke. But I see the same lies in that ink. Others joined, one farmer, then another. Voices rising with stories of debts twisted into ruin. The tide turned, fear melting into fury. Calloway's face hardened. For the first time, he looked less like an untouchable king and more like a cornered wolf. Sheriff Gray raised his pistol, leveling it steadily. Enough! You'll answer to the law, Calloway. The room thundered with voices, but Daniel's voice cut through, calm and commanding. This ends now. No more buried truths. Calloway's eyes darted across the crowd, seeking an ally, but found none. His men slowly lowered their hands, realizing the tide had turned. The sheriff's deputies moved in, seizing Calloway's arms. His smile faltered, collapsing into a sneer. This town will regret this, he spat. But as he was dragged out, the church erupted, not in fear, but in relief. Eliza sank onto a pew, Emma stirring softly against her. Tears blurred her vision. The weight she had carried for so long, the shame, the doubt, the unanswered questions, lifted like snow melting under spring's sun. Daniel knelt beside her, his hand brushing hers. It's over. She looked at him, her heart trembling with gratitude and something deeper, fragile but undeniable. You gave me back my voice. Daniel's smile was small but steady. You gave yourself back your life. Weeks later, the cabin glowed with warmth, its windows lit against the thawing land. Snow still lingered, but the air carried the promise of spring. Outside the small church, bells rang, not for accusation, but for union. Eliza stood in a simple white dress, Emma in her arms, Daniel at her side. The townsfolk gathered, faces no longer suspicious but softened with respect. As vows were spoken, Eliza felt Samuel's memory not as a wound, but as a thread woven into her future. Daniel's hand in hers was not a replacement, but a promise to build, not to erase. Emma laughed, her tiny hand reaching for Daniel's face. The sound rose like music above the bells. And beyond the hills, dawn broke, warm, golden, unyielding. A new day, born from buried truth. Sometimes hope doesn't come with thunder or triumph. It arrives quietly, like a knock at midnight. Eliza's journey reminds us that even in the harshest winters of life, when grief and hunger threaten to break us, compassion can find a way in. A stranger's kindness, a mother's courage, and the truth revealed at great cost. These remind us that healing is possible, that love can grow where loss once reigned. And in the end, it is not the storms that define us, but the strength we discover when we choose to open the door. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Share it in the comments below. And if you wish to walk with us through more stories of resilience, love, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next journey that waits just around the bend.